The invoice said net profit 14%, but the job site said otherwise because no one making 14% fills a dumpster with brand new material. The math may be right, but the habits are killing you. Welcome to the Contractor Success Forum. I'm Wade Carpenter with Carpenter Company CPAs, alongside Stephen Brown with McDaniel Whitley Bonding and Insurance. Today, we're exploring waste in your company that may be killing your profit. It may be literal waste, it may be metaphorical, but we're going to kick that around. Stephen, can you kick us off on this? What are your first impressions on this topic of waste killing profit?
Well, my first reaction was just a dumpster with extra material, broken material, new material on a job site that just got tossed. That was my first reaction about the topic. And then I was thinking more along the lines of what your construction company's doing that literally waste money for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways we can approach this. And a lot of times there is waste on a job that does actually literally end up in the dumpster. Sometimes people are ordering things that you may already have sitting in the warehouse, or maybe you had extra. But we're going to kick some of those ideas around today. So
I think the first thing that pops into my head waste-wise is lost and stolen tools on a job. That's one of them. I know as an accountant, you're thinking more of things not being billed properly or cost coded properly or estimated properly.
one of the things I was thinking about as we were putting this together was more of actually maybe literally going to your dumpster, your job site dumpster, and seeing what's thrown in there. Have we got things that were over ordered or waste that people measured something wrong or they cut something wrong? And there's going to be mistakes. There has to be mistakes. But are there habitual mistakes that we keep seeing that are costing you a lot of money? That's what I'm thinking.
Every contractor in the world bids a job with profit in it and wants to bring it in at more than that profit. A lot of times they'll consider, if I bring it in at the profit margin that I anticipated, and it wasn't a good job because I wasn't able to squeak enough extra profit out of it. But how you squeeze that extra profit out of your bid is a different animal from actually doing it.
Squeezing the profit out of that bid, sometimes you may be leaking some of that profit. And it may not just be literal waste, but are you over ordering things for your job? In construction, things, as we were saying, things are going to happen and things get cut wrong, things get broken, things sometimes disappear. If you're just over ordering just in case, and you end up with a whole bunch of materials left over that never get used, can you take it back? Is it just a habitual thing that you don't want to be held up on something that is critical to the job? I know we just did an episode on the materials and supply risk, that kind of stuff. Is there a point where you're just making sure that you got way too much and is profit leaking there? Or could you maybe take some of that material back? That's just my thought.
No, that's a good point, because now that some materials are hard to get a hold of, most people are going to kind of overorder them just in case. It's not like you can just take that material back like you can to the Home Depot and get a refund for the materials you didn't use. But again, you can with so many vendors, you can do that.
Another way I was thinking that we might be losing some money on our job, whether it's waste or whatever, we got wrong measurements. I was talking to a glass glazing contractor today, and he was talking about some of the problems he had with a general contractor that has openings for a window or a door or something like that was not measured properly by the general contractor or the architect when they framed it up. So it doesn't fit. He's talked in the past about, okay, you go out there and you measure it wrong, but are people habitually measuring wrong that ends up taking extra time to order something like glass or whatever the part is? Then you have to go back and order some more, and it delays the job. And maybe you got the equipment sitting on the job. The longer you sit out on the job and you got the people out there, it's just costing you more and more money. My thought is, can you standardize your measuring process? Can you take that extra step to make sure that they're measured right? There's going to be mistakes, but can you systematize it so that you make sure that more times than not, those measurements are actually going to be right?
That's a good point. And speaking of measurements, how do you measure the performance of your labor force? How busy they are, how effective they are, how much production they get done? The project manager, you set that before the day starts, and that can be a waste because you have to plug in your labor and your bid to get the job, right?
That's another avenue we could take, is the labor and properly managing them. Because I was actually having a conversation with one of our contractors in the last 2 weeks that very thing, that they had a highly paid project manager that was supposed to be out on a job. This was a custom build, and he did not schedule his subs properly. Out of a 22-day month, they didn't have anybody on the job site 11 days of the month.
Wow.
And it was just so poorly mismanaged. I guess another example of waste. Do we have the labor that is poorly managed? It may not be in your dumpster, but it is going down the drain.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's definitely something that AI could simply and easily help you with your scheduling.
In her case, she had the wrong person on the job and had to make a replacement. I have other conversations with contractors where they end up staying out on this job. And I already said it on this one, but one of their biggest problems is they rent equipment for the job. If it sits out there another week or 2 or 3, while maybe GC is slowing them down or whatever, every week they're out on that job, that equipment rental is leaking more profit out. You may not think of that in your dumpster, but metaphorically, it is going down the drain again.
Absolutely. I was thinking about our listeners that might do a lot of contracting that's unit price based. They're like, I don't have waste. The customer orders X amount of units, I deliver X amount of units. But at the same time, I've had customers where those units were delivered, but delivered to a different job site and stolen by the project manager and other people. Sometimes in cahoots with the supplier was this situation I was thinking about. You have to track the actual units that were delivered. You have to be able to measure them and know that's accurate and that they were on that site. There's a lot of waste involved there because if you're not measuring it, you just don't know.
Yeah, definitely. We've already talked about that, but maybe partial products. You got a half a bucket of drywall mud. You just toss it just because they don't want to tote it back to the shop. There's a point where maybe it's too easy to go just get a brand new tube of caulk or whatever it is. I guess that's where I'm going. Did you use part of the product, and could you still use it on something else?
Sure.
Also, another thought that I had that sort of leads into what we've already talked about is like death by delay. Do we have delays that are people sitting around idle or whatever, waiting for materials? Or do we have people that we don't have the materials on site, so they're making 10 trips to Home Depot during the day? You don't want to spend all that money to keep it on the truck, but if you ever think about how many times they go back and forth to go get supplies, that's not just costing them the time on the job. What is that really costing you in their labor and the productivity and their ability to generate more revenue?
Well, as an accountant, you can tell exactly what that's going to cost them. What elements are in place that cost you? It's just like I tell people when you have a workers' comp injury, it's not that workers' comp just pays for the injury, but you have lost productivity because they're not doing the work they're supposed to do and someone else has to quit work to take them to get medical help. There's a tangible way you can measure the most simple loss of time, isn't there?
Absolutely. One of those things that I think really slips through the cracks a lot of times, this back and forth shuffle, whether it's to Home Depot or to the doctor to take somebody that needs some stitches or something like that. Just a couple other thoughts I had on this was mobilization, those kind of things. Are you taking things once to the site? Are you returning multiple times to bring stuff out or whatever? Are you efficient in doing mobilization? That's part of another back and forth shuffle that contractors end up doing. If you took a little bit more time to plan, had a checklist or something like that, would say, okay, we need all this, especially if you're doing a job that is across state lines or not right in your backyard. If you're driving an hour each way or something like that, it's costing you a bunch of time as well as money to go back and forth.
You talk about driving an hour back and forth job site. That seems standard with every contractor that they drive a lot. Also that the vehicles parked and running. A lot of contractors never turn off their vehicles. Project managers, everyone have their way of staying comfortable and their way of doing things. But if they're not directly paying cost of doing it that way, then you've got to change that.
Yeah.
Wade, you were talking about checklists, for example, for mobilization and utilization for a job. What would that checklist look like?
Well, obviously, it would be different for every type of industry. If you're a heavy equipment guy and getting an excavator on the job, that's one thing, but do you need extra hydraulic oil? I don't know. Do you need spare parts? Do you need certain supplies? Again, it would be different for every industry. Some of my other thoughts on this, they all interrelate. Misaligned scheduling. Do you have waste because you had 2 or 3 project managers and they all expected the equipment to be on one job versus another job, or one crew and you're fighting over getting people to the particular job? the material not getting to the job site by the supplier? Is there some kind of misaligned scheduling that you really need to do? And again, this is not necessarily something you're going to see in your dumpster, but it is something that is leaking these profit out every single day.
So in the profit first for commercial contractor system, how would you use JobX as an indicator that you might have some waste?
That is a great way to figure out from the top level. If you say you're making 30% on your you're bidding that way, but you can never actually pay your job expenses from your job expense account. If you're constantly running low and it's costing you, you're really making 22%, but your bids always say 30%. Either you're not bidding your job right or something else is leaking. This is actually a classic thing that I hear a lot of times when I'm working with people on Profit First is that they made X amount, but they can never actually hit that mark. When we start looking at why, it's okay, we had this equipment sitting there. We had all these extra travel expenses or per diem or those kind of things that are really not taken into account. So sometimes it is a process of looking at what happens from a cash standpoint. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you, Stephen.
Sure. We're talking about waste, right? And we were leading into different directions and causes of waste. For example, we were talking a lot about scheduling conflicts, waste with subcontractors, waste with timing, waste with labor, waste with waiting for materials, all has to do with scheduling. How would you do an audit of your back office, for example, for waste?
I think you'd need to take the different functions, somebody that does the purchasing. How do they do it? What is the process for doing that? Are they getting the estimate from the project manager, but they've been yelled at because they got short or something like that? So they end up tending to overorder something.
I definitely get that. I also see contractors, if they think someone in their back office is not busy all the time, then they try to load them up with more work and responsibilities. That just might be a function of there not being a lot of work going on. Then when work starts back up, they're overwhelmed, and then efficiency is wasted.
You're talking about the back office stuff. That just brings to mind some things that I hear. For some contractors, the idea of a purchase order system, if I say PO, some people like run screaming the other way. But a lot of times I also see that people just have a PO number and there's no real checking to that. So even though we said it was going to cost this and all this stuff, the bill came in, but the PO said it was going to cost X amount per unit, but it actually costed 20% more. The pricing that they quoted was not in there. And that's where we put some systems in place for some of these contractors where part of our invoice management stuff will check the PO so that we can spot these problems. When a human's doing it, a lot of times they're just trying to do as best they can. But sometimes the back office in a contractor's office, they're just overwhelmed and overloaded with things to do. And part of it is going back to the system, having a good system that's set up that can find some of this waste.
That's an absolute fact. And have an organization that can be helping you do this and not you having to wait until you're not busy to implement these sort of things.
Yeah. I guess another way, and I don't see this a lot, but it does happen. I've heard of it happening, is we worry about not having enough supervision on a job sometimes. I've also heard stories where the project manager wants to make sure everything is absolutely perfect. So they start over inspecting and they start micromanaging waste. And sometimes that leads to, okay, just stop and we're going to take all this extra time. It ends up pushing the timeline on the job. So there has to be a happy medium between having good supervision on the job versus going the other extreme and just micromanaging.
Yeah, good project managers, it's certainly an art form. It's not just about scheduling, and it's about implementation and making sure your fingers on the pulse of what it takes to get each phase of the project completed in the time frame that's been set for you to get that done. A lot of time with project managers, that's more important than the cost issues. Maybe they're managing a project and they didn't do the estimating.
I know you already started this. We talk about a few different fixes, profit saving moves, some of this stuff to address this. And the first of which is probably sounds stupid, but a literal dumpster audit, a weekly check, photo evidence of what's thrown in the dumpster. You don't really want to go dumpster diving, but you go in there and take a picture of it, take it back to the shop. And again, there's a point where people are just going to be wasteful because it's not their money. Sometimes we have extra on the job. We have some kind of return policy. Can we actually take it back and get some kind of credit or reduction in the bill? Some of these other things, I guess, it's just some kind of incentive for the crew to not waste things, maybe some bonuses, some kind of training on material handling, training on things like measuring. We talked about discipline, about scheduling, inventory. These are just a couple of ideas I had to address some of these issues. Any other thoughts on that?
No, great ideas.
Well, with that, hope our listeners think a little bit more about where profit may be leaking in your organization. Take a deeper dive and walk through it with your team and see what's going on. And literally, as I said, go do some kind of dumpster audit and see what's going on. We appreciate you listening to us. We do this every single week. If you got any thoughts or comments, throw them in the notes below. We'd love to hear it. Again, we do this every single week, and we will see you on the next show.